You may be wondering who these people are and why we are watching them. Perhaps I can help. Bienvenue and welcome to our parish of Pancourt. My name is Edmond Gagne. I am a descendant of one of the pioneer families of our parish, and am currently the president of the seniors club called Le Club de l'Amitié. We have prepared this year on our 20th anniversary a historical video of our parish. We hope that in viewing these contents you will find them enlightening as we look at our past, who we are today, and where we are going.
In the 1400s, Europeans looked to the West as the next great frontier of civilization, even before the exploration of the Vikings, before Christopher Columbus. Fishing fleets from Europe were already familiar with the Grand Banks of Newfoundland. The first explorer to visit eastern Canada was Jacques Cartier, who discovered and named the St. Lawrence River. Samuel de Champlain, after founding the city of Quebec, sent exploration teams west. Later, the Black Robes, as the Jesuits were called by the American Indians, brought the message of Christianity to the New World. In 1640, one of these incredible men, Father Jean de Brebeuf, along with his Jesuit companion, Father Joseph-Marie Chaumonot, explored southwestern Ontario. They established missions along the way. One of these missions, St. Michel, was located on the Thames River between today's Jeanette's Creek and St. Peter's Church. Since the two missionaries were traveling by canoe on the Thames River, they passed through the present parish of Pancourt, whose southern boundary is the Thames River. Today, the people of Pancourt still swell with pride at the mention of the martyr's name. Father Brebeuf died at the hands of the Iroquois and is today a saint of the Catholic Church. The New World attracted the adventurous and the oppressed, people for whom the chance to own a farm in the new land outweighed the danger and uncertainty of such a voyage. By 1667, after the signing of a treaty with the Iroquois nation, some officers of the Carignan Regiment sent to defend the new colony became the seigneurs or landowners, subletting their land to their former soldiers who became known as habitants or tenants. Boatloads of marriageable young women, known as the king's daughters, were sent to the colony to marry the seigneurs and the habitants and start families. Some inhabitants of a small French settlement near the mouth of the Thames River can claim as their ancestors either a Carignan soldier and a king's daughter, or ancestry to farmers and fur dealers who immigrated from practically all parts of France. Previous to 1790, this settlement had no history. Its only inhabitants were the Indians. By May of 1791, however, 28 families had already settled along the Thames River. They were primarily French, with some English and German. When missionaries from Assumption Church in Windsor, the oldest Catholic church in Canada west of Montreal, visited the tiny mission north of the Thames, the people often apologized for their poverty, saying, "We have no bread." Some of the housewives kept a small amount of flour in reserve in order to make a small loaf of bread for the visiting priests. Giving it, they said, "Our bread is small, very short, but we will give it to you wholeheartedly." The missionaries from Assumption Parish repeated this story and began to refer to the area as the Mission of the Pain Court, shortbreads. Eventually, the people themselves began to refer to their parish as Pain Court. The early days of Pain Court were difficult. Clearing the land was backbreaking work, and the winters were long. The community on La Tranche River, as the Thames was then known, was racked with starvation and illness. In 1829, the name Pain Court was used by the surveyor Charles Rankin when he surveyed the Pain Court block. Some of the names of the settlers were Faubert, Charon, MacDonald, Bobby, Urquhart, Lesdaru, Crow, Riom, Matt, Desilets, Primo, Delage, Bergeron, and McCrae. Previous to 1852, there was no chapel in Pain Court. Visiting missionaries celebrated masses in private homes, and the dead were buried in the cemetery, awaiting the blessing of the priest on his next visit. Recognizing the need of the settlers, the Bishop of Toronto instructed Father Claude Antoine Ternay to build a chapel in Pain Court. Made of logs and hand-sawn boards, the first chapel, similar to the one shown in this photograph, was dedicated to St. Joseph. 4 years later, in 1854, the construction of a larger permanent church began. It was dedicated to the Immaculate Conception, a dogma proclaimed by Pope Pius IX that year. St. Joseph was kept as a secondary patron. By 1863, the walls were plastered, new altars and pews were installed, and in 1864, a steeple was erected for the new bell, which was baptized under the name Marie Thérèse. The church has always been the center of this community. In early days, the newspapers from Quebec and Detroit were read aloud from the church steps, rather than passed from family to family, which would have been almost impossible. Another name linked with the history of Pain Court is Father Pierre Poin, founder of Catholic schools in Ontario. Father Poin was once congratulated by Lord Elgin himself on his success in keeping alive the French language in Ontario. Father Poin, who blessed the first church in Pain Court in 1855, the Immaculate Conception, had also opened 13 schools in Ontario, one of them in Pain Court. When the people applied to the powers to be to have the name of their village changed to Immaculate Conception, the request was ignored. In 1860, when the government granted permission to establish a post office in Pain Court, the name was changed to Dover South, much to the chagrin of the locals, who persisted in using the name Pain Court among themselves. Until this time, the church registers made no mention of the existence of a rectory to lodge the missionary in Pain Court. However, one must have been built not long after the building of the church, since on November 8, 1858, the missionary, Father Raynell, draws a list of furnishings which were transferred from the rectory of the St. Peter's Church to the rectory of the parish of the Immaculate Conception. Sadly, on May 4, 1874, the new church was destroyed by fire. the residing priest, Father Duprat, began the construction of a new brick church. In 1875, it was sufficiently finished to celebrate Mass May 30th. In 1885, it was finally completed by Father Duprat's replacement, Father Joseph Bauer, a strong, energetic man who told the parishioners, "I have come to tame you," and an old-timer added, "and tame us he did." In 1911, the church, only 35 years old, was replaced again due to the ravages of weather and the inferior quality of some of the building materials. In 1903, Alfie Scheff brought the telephone into Pincourt at his own expense. In 1910, natural gas was brought from Tilbury. And in the same year, an electric railroad connected the village to Chatham. On January 25, 1911, Father Alfred Emery arrived in Pincourt. A native of nearby Grand Point, Father Emery knew the area and the people. He quickly convinced them of the need to build a new church. On March 3, 1911, a magnificent Gothic structure opened its doors. It was topped by a large belfry, flanked by two smaller steeples, with a statue of the Immaculate Conception over the entrance, a choir loft, a pipe organ, and a seating capacity of 600. The cost, $44,000. That same year, an adjoining brick rectory was built. In March of 1911, Father Emery, using all his political connections in Ottawa, finally had the name Pincourt made official. On June 1, 1919, a monument to the Sacred Heart was erected in the churchyard in thanksgiving for the safety of the local soldiers returning from World War I, and for the parish being spared from the terrible Spanish flu epidemic of 1918. Father Emery, in his prayers to God, promised to build the monument if no one was lost to the flu or the war. No one died, and the monument stands today. Father Emery was instrumental in bringing in the Sisters of St. Joseph from London to teach the children. By December of 1923, a convent had been built to house the nuns. During 1925 and 1926, Father Emery wrote a book detailing the history of Pincourt. It was to be finished for the 75th anniversary of the parish on July 5th and 6th of 1928. Today, some of the older people in the parish still talk about the 75th anniversary. This film was taken by Father Emery himself and later restored by TV Ontario for a documentary on the French villages in Ontario. In 1928, Father Emery received news of his transfer to the parish of St. Joachim and left his beloved parish after 18 years, the longest time any priest had stayed in the parish. He had renewed, nearly recreated, the parish of Pincourt. Father Loisel replaced Father Emery. His 3.5-year stay marked the beginning of the Great Depression. On January 2nd, 1937, during the ministry of Father Zotique Mayeux, the church once again burned down. Edna Pelletier, one of the most senior members of the parish, recalls that day.
We have here Mrs. Edna Pelletier, who is one of the eldest residents of the parish. And I'm going to ask Mrs. Pelletier to, if she can recall some of the events shortly before this incident. I understand that your son was baptized in the old church just
Yes.
before it burned. Is that correct?
Yes. And would you like the name of the godparents?
Well, what your son's name was Bernard?
My son, yes, Joseph Bernard, yes.
Yes. He was baptized in what month?
In January.
No, what? In December?
In December,
Yes.
yes. Yes.
Just previous to the fire.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes. Yes, it was just about.
I understand that he was the last person
He
baptized
was
in
the
that
last
church.
person, yes.
Mm-hmm. And do you recall the morning of the fire, where you were at? And
I was at my dad's, Joseph Robert,
yes,
and I happened to look through the window and I saw the smoke, so I said, I bet you that's my house that's burning down. But it wasn't. It was the church. So I called up Mrs. Frank Primo, and she told me, yes. She said, it isn't your house. It's the church that's burning.
mm-hmm. Your house just happened to be right in front of the church.
Right, yes, right in
Mhm.
front.
Mm-hmm. When you first came to the village to discover that, in fact, it was not your house that was burning, it was the church,
Mm-hmm.
what sort of impression did you get that morning?
You know, nothing. You know, I knew it was burnt, and that's all. I didn't get no. But of course, I felt sorry, you know, to see our church, all the damage there was.
Is there, how advanced was the fire at the time that when you came in to see it? Was it pretty well burned down?
It was out, yes, when I came home.
Mm-hmm. So then after the church fire, that left us without a church to attend Mass on Sundays. Do you recall what happened after that? Where were our Masses held?
It was at a separate school, St. Catherine's School. That's
Yes.
where we go to church. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Discovered by altar boy Alfie Emery at 7:30 in the morning, the blaze, which originated in the coal room, was already out of control. Although the altar boy rang the church bell incessantly, the parishioners thought it was announcing the death of seriously ill Pope Pius XI and disregarded it. Once again, Pincourt was without a church. Plans to build a fourth church began immediately, and on December 8, 1937, the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, the new church was blessed by Bishop J.T. Kidd. On December 21st, the main altar and the side altar on the right were consecrated. The third altar to the left would remain unconsecrated as long as there was a debt on the church. In 1939, World War II was declared, and, as in World War I, all the young men who enrolled or were drafted returned home safely. In 1945, after accompanying a group of young people to Ottawa, Father Mayeux was found dead in his room. He died while sitting reading his breviary. Father Charles Laliberté A stern, ascetic man with a ruthless punctuality came next. Many a bride marched down the aisle during the reading of the epistle because the bridal party was a few minutes late. Needless to say, wedding parties began arriving at least 10 minutes before the time of the wedding. In the 1940s, the Ushers Club was formed. They proved to be an active and efficient group who helped with the finances of the parish and the care of the needy. In 1988, the Ushers Club disbanded and formed a council of the Knights of Columbus. Vincent Pinsonneau was elected Chartered Grand Knight of Council number 9693, of which 18 of our members form part of the Father James Assembly, 4th degree. In 1950, Father Ducharme, a former assistant of Father Emery's in the 1920s, was transferred back to the parish. Due to failing health, he remained only 3 years. During his stay, however, the St. Joseph nuns left Pincourt and were replaced by the Grey nuns from Ottawa. He was replaced by his assistant, Father Ulysse Lefebvre, who together with the Ushers Club and the Ladies' Altar Society and the school children prepared for the 1954 centennial celebration. Here we see the Pontifical Mass celebrated by Bishop John Cody. The organist was Mrs. Marie Emery, who had been the organist since 1905. She remained the organist until 1962, when she was replaced by her son Amédée. In July of 1955, Father Euclid Chevalier arrived. He was a no-nonsense priest who detested swearers even more than liars, because a liar insults only his equal. A swearer insults God. The 1960s brought Father Leo Sharon and change.
Before Vatican II, most of the music in the churches had to be sung in Latin. The Mass was celebrated in Latin, and people were accustomed to hearing the Mass in Latin. And even if they did not understand it, their prayer books contained both the Latin and the French or the English equivalent to the prayers being recited by the priest. Now, with the coming of Vatican II, the vernacular was accepted. The priests started to celebrate Mass in French, and the people, everybody, could follow the Mass. Furthermore, the altar was changed around, and the priest now faced the people instead of having his back to the people when he celebrated Mass. These were changes which were accepted by most everybody because they understood better and could follow better. As far as the music was concerned, it took a little time for parishes like Pincourt to have in their repertoire French masses and French hymns. We had the old French hymns, which he had been singing once in a while, but these were considered now passé. And a little more lively music came in. Guitars were introduced, and some really it was to encourage the younger set to come to church. And little by little, the organ was considered an instrument to be used mostly at funerals. In the 1970s, the early 1970s, the communion rail was removed in order to create a closer relationship between the clergy in the sanctuary and the faithful in church. And also, people did not receive communion kneeling down as in the olden days, but standing up in the middle, in the main aisle, and then returning to their seats, their pews. A few years later, the organ was transported down to the right front of the church, and the idea was to encourage the people to sing more during Mass, participate in the singing. Now that was a thing which was not done before Vatican II. The people in church were very passive. They simply followed what the priest was doing. The choir sang the parts of the Mass, but not the faithful. And this is a thing which has been very difficult for the people to accept. Some still prefer to attend Mass in the old ways than participate in the singing. Now, the choir that we had in those days did not like to sing downstairs. Downstairs, we felt so conspicuous, thinking that everybody was looking at us all the time. However, that feeling was changed a couple of years later when a lady told me after Mass She said, they moved the organ downstairs, didn't they? Well, I said, it's been there for the past 2 years, and she hadn't noticed. So but the choir still preferred to sing upstairs in the traditional way, and that's why finally the organ was moved back in the choir loft so that the communication between the choir director and the organist was easier.
Pincourt has not been without its share of natural calamities, as this footage of the 1979 spring ice storm and flood clearly show. On June 10, 1979, the parish celebrated its 125th anniversary. It would be impossible to tell the story of Pincourt without focusing on the importance of education to the parish and the struggles and sacrifices of this community to preserve its unique school system. Father Poin used the first chapel as his Catholic school. However, as early as 1848, the records of the Municipal Council of Dover mention that its meetings were held in the Pincourt School, but doesn't state the location of that school. The oldest school parishioners remember was located on the east side of the Winter Line. This school was built before 1875. In 1928, a new school, St. Catherine School, was built across the road. The old school was sold and became a garage with living quarters above. Later, the garage was changed to a restaurant. Today, it is operated by owner Miss Rosemarie Benoit. In 1910, the Ontario legislature limited the teaching of French in Ontario to 1 hour a day, and that by an English teacher. In June 1912, the infamous Regulation 17 was enacted. It was not until 1927, after years of arguing that the regulation was abolished and French Canadians in Ontario were given the right to be taught in their native tongue. In the mid-1930s, Father Mayeux and the local school board met with the Minister of Education in Toronto and obtained permission to establish the first public Francophone secondary school in the province. This school in Pincourt allowed local students the opportunity to qualify for entrance to the University of Ottawa's Normal School. In 1950, the St. Joseph Sisters left Pincourt and were replaced by the Grey Nuns of Ottawa. Today they are known as the Sisters of Charity. Until 1953, the continuation school was operated in the St. Catherine School. In that year, a new school was built on Notre Dame Street under the direction of the Grey Nuns. In 1960, the school was expanded. In 1970, the name of the school was changed from H.J. Payette Continuation School to Pincourt Secondary School. By the 1980s, local English-speaking pupils who had attended St. Catherine School since kindergarten opted to continue their studies in French at the local high school, thus increasing enrollment. In 1984, full funding was given to private schools in Ontario. The Pincourt Secondary School became a Catholic high school under the Kent County Roman Catholic School Board. Mr. Edmond Chauvin recalls
Ask,
this time.
Edmond, what prompted the inhabitants or the school board to build a high school, and how did they go about it?
The people of Pincourt and its district had fought very strongly to keep open their French classes. And in order to supply teachers for these French classes, they needed a high school which would bring about some pupils who would then go on to the teachers' school to come out and teach in the different French schools that they had. And so therefore the people of Pincourt and of Grand Point worked very hard to organize a continuation school district. With the help of their inspector, Mr. H.G. Payette, they more or less built a school organization which formed a bridge over all the different schools that they had in the district. They had 5 different public schools, small public schools, and mainly 2 separate schools in the villages of Grand Point and Pincourt. And with the help of the inspector, they organized a continuation school district with the help of all these schools, and this continuation school was mainly a Francophone continuation school, and it was, by the way, the very first public Francophone school in the province that was a secondary school. All the other schools at that particular time that went on in Ottawa or in the north could only be subsidized up to the grade 10. So therefore, those who were teaching grade 11, 12, and 13 were usually private schools.
And you were one of the first teachers in the new continuation school, I understand.
When the school board brought in the Grey Nuns from Ottawa to take over the schools, the Grey Nuns taught for 1 year. And at that particular time, they had Vincent Caron as a teacher, and he was not qualified to teach secondary school subjects. He was an elementary school teacher, and he was teaching under a letter of permission. So the school board came over and interviewed me. I was teaching with the Basilian Fathers at Assumption College in Windsor. And they asked me if I would come and teach with the Grey Nuns in a French secondary school in Pincourt. And that's how come I landed in Pincourt.
And you were talking about the relationship between, you're saying that the Grey Nuns were the first teachers to run the school, the secondary school, for 1 year only?
No, the Grey Nuns were not the first ones. The first teachers, the first nuns who ran the secondary school were the nuns of St. Joseph. But after a while, the nuns of St. Joseph did not have enough subjects to be able to run the school, so therefore the school board asked the association, the French Association, ACFO, to intercede with the Grey Nuns in Ottawa to see if they would not accept to take over the entire system of elementary and secondary school in Pincourt. And they came in just a year before I did. The first nun that was the principal of the high school was Marie Giselle, and she was here just for 1 year. Then we had Sir Marie Andrea, who was here for quite a few years. Then it was followed by Sir Marie Lionel, and the one who left her mark the most, probably because she was here the longest, was Sir Marie de la Providence.
Yes.
You see.
What other term of the do you recall in those days that could be of value to this interview?
Well, the new school came about in 1953, and that was a big change because at that particular time the continuation school was existing in the upper part of the elementary school, and of course the elementary school was crowded because of that, and the locales were rather crowded. Also for the secondary school, there was really no science laboratory, and there was no gym. We used to go to the basement of the church in order to have some gym classes and so on. So the 1953 opening of the school was a big event. There was, at that particular time, no gym yet, but it was a big difference. There was, I'd say, 4 classrooms. There was a complete laboratory for science room, and the gymnasium was built further on about 10 years later, you see.
Today, the parishioners are justifiably proud of their school system, which has yielded hundreds of teachers, many doctors, lawyers, nurses, and other professionals taught in their French language and holding on to their proud heritage.
Tu as voulu au cours des temps que l'autre créature révèle ce qui serait la grâce chrétienne. Dès le commencement du monde.
And we are still here, 150 years and 4 churches later, still welcoming new souls to our little community. Today we honor the memory of our valiant ancestors, and it is to them that we dedicate this film. Their hearts were big, their faith strong, and their foresight lit the way for us to follow. Many thanks to all those who offered a helping hand in making this film a reality. With faith and confidence, we look to a bright future.